Hi, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the books I read in August, and I'm excited to share these with you. So if you enjoy homeschool content and lifestyle content, please remember to subscribe and let's talk about these books. Okay, so in the month of August, I read 2 1/4-ish books. I am including the third book because I finished it, it's like on the 5th of September or something. And so I started it in August, finished it in September. So we're just including it here. And I will have a book review down below for just one of these on my blog. And so if you want to check that out and get additional quotes, additional insights, feel free to do so. But without further ado, let's start with the first book. Okay, so our book club book for this last month was We Are Not Free. And I really enjoyed this book. Going into it, I didn't know what it was about. And when I found out, I was more excited. Again, it's a World War II Japanese internment camp book. And so whenever I say I'm excited about those things, I feel a little bit weird saying that, but it's one of my favorite time periods to read about. And so I've read tons of historical fiction from that time period. So this book was written in a very unique way because it's following a bunch of teenagers. And so each chapter focuses on a different teenager and their story from coming from San Francisco and being put into a Japanese internment camp. And some of them were still in California in internment camp. Some of them were brought to Utah, which is where I live, to Topaz. And I've actually been there. It was years ago when I was in college. I had to write a paper about it. So my mom and I went there. And it is literally out in the middle of nothingness, nowhere. Just a yucky mess. And I just remember feeling so horrible when we went out there and just, how could we do this to these people? So this story goes through the teenager's perspective, which I thought was a unique take on it. I don't think I've read any like really Japanese internment books. And so this was the first one. So I don't know if there's others out there if you have any to recommend, but this was a unique perspective from the teenager's point of view. The hardest part about this book is trying to keep track of everyone. It gets a little confusing. So I didn't use this when I read the book, but someone recommended it at book club, said it was helpful. So in the beginning, there is a list of all of the kids' names and their nicknames if they have one, their family number, if they're male or female, their age, and where they lived previously. So they said this was really helpful to kind of look back on because it is hard to keep track of who belongs to who. As you read further into the story, it becomes easier because you're more exposed to everybody as each individual talks about the other people. So it becomes a little easier to keep track of them. But I did love that it was written that way. I thought it was really fun, really unique, and just really great to gain these different types of perspectives. I also feel like this would be a great book for kids to read. There are a couple chapters with a lot of F words in them. Just a warning. So you have to censor that part because it just depends. There's 2 teenage boys that tend to have a little bit more of a mouth in this book. And so that's the only thing for the most part, like it's pretty clean. And I know one of the ladies had her teenage girls read it and they really enjoyed it. I would feel comfortable reading it to my kids. Obviously I'd censor a few things as I read it, but I would feel comfortable doing that just because I feel like it's something we don't talk about a lot. And I was very surprised at book club that a lot of people didn't know very much about Japanese internment. Obviously, I learned more about it reading this book, and I knew a fair amount about it from having to write about it when I was in college. And so it's a surprising thing that we don't talk about a whole lot. So I feel like if you wanted to do World War II unit and cover Japanese internment, this might be a good book to include and to read to your kids just to expose them to what was going on in the world. I'm all about making sure our kids aren't sheltered from sensitive issues. It doesn't mean you give them the whole issue. You know, it depends on their age and developmentally where they're at. But I really like this book. I'm so glad we picked it. It isn't something I probably would have read otherwise if it wasn't for book club. So again, I love book club because it exposes me to books I don't normally read. Okay, so the next book I read was Passion Driven Education. I really enjoyed this book. It's a fairly quick read. The words are kind of big and it's shorter. And so I enjoyed reading this book, and the whole idea of this book is that our public education system is a little bit flawed. I'm sure there's other people that would already say like, well, duh. But the idea of this book is, it calls it a factory model school, which is what it was actually called, the public school system back in the 1800s. It mentions it in this book. And this idea of how can we quickly produce as much as possible, like a factory does, trying to make things as efficient as we can and kind of streamline the process and just whip out as many things as possible in a small amount of time. And that's kind of how the public education system was formatted. How can we put kids through this system and just kind of whip them out and streamline the system and get them through? And while in some ways that's okay, there's a lot of ways where it's not okay, because it kind of takes away kids' ability to be self-driven and to be curious about the world, because people are telling them what to do every step of the way. So this book, he kind of goes through, is it a he? I always say he, and then I'm like, wait, I don't know if the author's a boy. My bad, sorry about that, but yes, Connor. And so anyways, he goes through and talks about what the school system kind of looks like, what it does, and then goes through and talks about some ways that we could focus more on passion-driven education. And there's several quotes in here I liked, but one of them that I loved is talking about critical thinking and how a lot of kids nowadays have a really hard time with critical thinking because it requires this very creative environment to learn how to be a critical thinker. If you're just always telling kids what to do, they never learn how to think for themselves. Okay, they need this environment that's also independent and self-driven, as well as having some instruction from a teacher. So it says critical thinking is inherently anti-authoritarian, which if you study development at all, authoritarian parenting is this is what you're gonna do, I don't care what you say. And there's very little love involved. It's very dictatorial, dictatorship-like, whatever. It's very much like that. And so it says it's critical thinking is inherently anti-authoritarian. Those who have this capacity do not accept information merely because of its source. Because I said so isn't good enough. Ideas must rise and fall based on the message rather than the messenger. And so this idea of being able to explore a message, understand where it's coming from, explore other avenues of that message, and decide for yourself what you think about it is something that's harder for the kids in these public education systems to do. So that's kind of what he talks about through here. And let's see, I have all my notes right here so I can remember everything that I was gonna say to you. But I really also enjoyed just this little snippet of a quote. It says, what's more important, what your children know or who they are? And I related to this book so much because I was one of those students that I went in, I wanted to know exactly what I needed to do to get an A, and I was really, really good at doing those things. And, memorizing everything, studying through everything. And there was a lot of things that as soon as that test was done, it was gone out of my brain. I didn't remember it anymore at all. I hadn't actually learned anything. I had just been taught to be a robot and to go through the steps that I needed to. And my husband sees this. He's a college professor, university professor. All the times with his students, when he tries to allow them more room for creativity, they're like, but no, what do I need to do to get an A? And I think that's something that is, I am one that likes A's, right? And so it's hard for me to say that that's not important, but it becomes so much of a focus that we forget about the fun in learning. And it also stops us from exploring other avenues of learning, because what if we don't do well in it? And then that grade goes on our GPA and then we're in big trouble. And so just this idea of allowing us to explore and not having this very stringent, you have to get this grade, you have to do well, we're gonna just tell you what you need to do and push you through the system. You'll graduate, get a scholarship, go to college, do the same thing, and not really learn to expand your horizons. And so is it more important our children know a whole lot of stuff, or who they become as they learn all these things, as they go through this process of knowing? So something else that this book focuses on is asking your kids what they want to learn, which is like, duh. But how many times do we just focus on what we want to learn, which isn't bad, especially in a homeschool setting. I feel like a lot of times we have some fun things that they can't do in a public school setting. But I thought about this maybe for the first day of school, going through and be like, okay, what would be fun for you to learn this year? And we can kind of go through those things and have it be them involved in the process of learning instead of me just saying, this is what we're going to be doing. And that's something he does mention in here, that with homeschool, you have to be careful, because sometimes we're like, oh, I don't want my kids in public school, or I just want to teach them at home, or whatever your reasons are for homeschooling. But then we also create the same environment that they would have in public school about just getting through all the curriculum and doing like, no, we have to do this today, we have to do this today, we have to do this today, instead of having it be this more exploration process. We're dictating to them what they're gonna do, which is the same thing that happens in public school a lot of the time. So to make sure that we don't do that, you know, it's okay to have book work and to do some of those things, but to also make sure that the kids are enjoying it. And something that is amazing about this book is at the back, he goes through a whole bunch of subjects right through here. And he says, okay, if your kid likes horses, let's see, I think horses was the first thing in here. More examples, let's see where it is. Yes, if your kid likes horses, this is how you can relate it to history and talk about history of horses, how you can do it with English, how you can do it with math and science. And he does that for several different topics. I think Legos are in here. There's several of them that give you an idea of, oh, this is what my kid really likes right now. How can we bring in all these subjects and teach them, instead of just being like, oh no, you hate math, too bad, sit down and do your math. You know, which we all do that. And I feel like as a homeschool mom, I've become more aware of where my kids are at and try to take things at their pace in a way that makes learning fun for them. I'm not perfect at it. Obviously, I like to be in control. I still am very much more of that dictator personality, but it's something that I'm working on, because I know how much more fun learning is for them when they can relate it to something that they love. So that was this book. There's so much more in here. I probably babbled on forever and ever about it, but I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good read. Obviously, I don't agree 100% with everything, which is always the case with almost anything I read, but I really loved all the ideas it gave and the perspective that it gave. Okay, so the last book that I read, partially in August and mostly in September, was The Alice Network. And I really enjoyed this book as well. Again, it's World War II era. It flips back and forth between two women in World War I and World War II. And the one in World War I was a spy. So the Alice Network, I looked this up and it talks a little bit about it at the back of the book, was a real thing. And so this is historical fiction. So there's a lot of characters that aren't real, but there's several that are based on real characters from history. And so this was a spy network that helped during World War I. And so it goes through the life of this spy. So basically every other chapter is taking you back 1915 and then 1947. So it's just post World War II. And just talking about their experiences and how they found each other, because they're interacting in 1947 and helping each other kind of solve some mysteries that they had, some things they were curious about. It goes through their experiences, and I don't want to give too much of the story away because it really was a good story. These kind of books always make me cringe a little bit inside and also make me feel kind of snobby for being an American, because I read these and think of all the hard things they went through, everything that they suffered through. And it's like, I am so grateful for everything I have. It makes me grateful and also just makes me feel like I should be nicer with everything that I've been given. And so I really, again, enjoyed it. I've said that several times. There are some very sensitive issues in this book. So there's talk of abortion, there's pregnancy, there's the spy sleeping with her boss, basically, to get information. So there is a little bit more sexual content. I wouldn't say it's graphic. I don't know. I don't read graphic sexual content. If there is any, I usually like close those books and put them away. But there is a little bit more of those things. So if those are things you're more sensitive to or don't want to be reading, I probably wouldn't recommend reading this book, but I feel like it had a lot of good information and it was a different perspective of a World War I, II book that I have read before in the past. So I enjoyed this enough that like, it's almost 500 pages, guys. And I cruised through like the last 300 or 400 pages because it was that good. Okay, so those are the books that I read mostly in August. I enjoyed them. If you have book recommendations for me, please put them down in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up and I will see you next time.